So today I'm going to be presenting my project on looking at how we talk about citizenship through congressional speeches. And it's probably no surprise to people who are at this conference that citizenship has really changed dramatically throughout the Trump presidency, whether it was restrictions that were enacted in 2017, the so-called Muslim ban that was created that enlisted a lot of public protests and civic engagement around that topic, to even more recently, restrictions that were created because of the COVID-19 pandemic and the limiting of visas during that time, especially for international students. So citizenship remains a really critical topic. And so this project aims to take a look at specifically how do members of Congress talk about citizenship, and essentially how do they talk about good citizenship? So what does it mean to be a good citizen? And so hopefully this project gives us a little bit of insight, especially in the context of this past 4 years. We'll just start by talking about the context of citizenship more broadly. And one of the most immediate things that we recognize is that during the Trump presidency, citizenship has been a constant focus for the executive and legislative branches. So we can see a quote here from Mitch McConnell. He says, one of the most challenging and yet important areas of policy under the Trump presidency is citizenship. The New York Times sort of concurs with this and says that Trump's citizenship policies are probably how we're going to remember a lot of his work in the White House. And then we also see sort of a context that tells us that citizenship isn't just who tells you you're a resident or issues your passport, that there's a whole set of social construction factors that go into what makes a citizen versus somebody who just lives somewhere versus somebody who's new to an area. So this isn't just sort of policy or legal status that we're talking about, but more of these social normative behaviors. And so I thought we'd start with a video that's hopefully a little bit familiar to people. This is from a 2016 rally from President Trump. And this is actually a similar approach to what he's using today. He's using this exact same antidote. This is the snake. You've probably seen versions of this. It's actually fun in the C-SPAN archives. There's about 10 versions of this exact speech that we're going to watch. But hopefully this will give us some insight into sort of the context with which we approach the topic of citizenship.
All right, get them out. Thank you. All right, they're gone. You know what it is? I'll tell you. And be very gentle, very, very gentle. Say, you know, I've done it all ways. When I'm like this, they say Trump is getting weaker. When I'm tough, they say he's too tough. You can't win. You can't win. Okay. Okay, let's go. Are you ready? You ready? So here's the story. You think of this in terms of the people coming into the country, especially coming in from Syria. We don't know where they are. We don't know who they are. We don't know how they're getting in. They're all over the place. Believe me, it's going to be a problem. You think of this, all right? This is called the snake. On her way to work one morning, down the path along the lake, a tender-hearted woman saw a poor, half-frozen snake. His pretty-colored skin had been all frosted with the dew. Oh, well, she cried, I'll take you in, and I'll take care of you. Take me in, oh tender woman. Take me in, for heaven's sake. Take me in, oh tender woman, sighed the broken snake.
So if you're on the edge of your seat trying to figure out how that story ends, this is basically an allegory for inviting people into the country and then them sort of acting in a way that you kind of expected them to all along. And so we'll kind of ignore the dog whistles that people call out in this particular speech, as well as in other versions of this exact same poem. I'm happy to send the link if anyone wants to see the rest of his speech here. But like I said, this is sort of a continuation of a larger context where immigration was really a central focus of the Trump campaign in 2016, and it remains that way for 2020. So let's take a look at citizenship as policy. And one of the first things that's important to recognize is that Congress is supposed to have an absolute rule over the naturalization process and immigration in the United States. But most scholars would agree that even though they're supposed to have this sort of absolute power with it, in reality, this power is much more restricted based on the fact that a lot of legislation that comes forward about immigration and citizenship is actually done through executive orders from the President of the United States. And this is clear throughout the Trump presidency that a lot of the Congress's action on immigration has been very much responsive and reactive to the things that are coming out of the Trump administration. And so we see sort of, again, this play in between what Congress is supposed to be able to do and reality, how they are functioning in terms of this focus. We also see that there's two large federal agencies that are sort of in charge of immigration and citizenship in the United States. I'm actually a USCIS certified instructor, so I also teach the US citizenship class. And so they are one group that is in charge of sort of helping people through the naturalization process. And then, of course, we have ICE, which has had a really prolific 4 years, including everything from calls to defund it to protest movements surrounding it. And we see sort of a lot of activism that's coming as a result of their presence in this process. It's also important to recognize there's sort of this interplay that's happening right now in citizenship between DACA and the DREAM Acts. And despite what Trump said at the last town hall meeting, they are not the same thing. One provides a pathway to citizenship and one does not for Dreamers. So it's important to recognize that those are also two high profile sets of policies that are at play here. And then finally, one other context that scholars would argue is that citizenship isn't just a stamp on a piece of paper that someone gets. There's actually an entire industry that surrounds it. So we have lawyers and activist groups. We have instructors like myself who teach the citizenship test. We have government personnel, and we have all these other types of figures who are involved in it. So it's actually a multi-billion-dollar year industry in addition to sort of having these sort of standard government procedures attached to it. One of the things that this paper really focuses on is the sort of interplay between duty-based and engaged citizenship. And this comes out of Dalton's 2009 work on what makes a good citizen. And if you study generational political communication at all, you'll notice that these two tend to be very generationally defined. So duty-based citizenship says that a person is a good citizen when they carry out the duties that are enacted and are responsible within being an American citizen. So in general, we think of these things as voting, performing, going to court, when you're asked to serve on a jury. These are the responsibilities that are given to you when you are a citizen. To be a good citizen, you do those duties because they are asked of you by the United States. On the other hand, we have a view that good citizenship is really a reflection of engaged citizenship. So it's not just doing the things that the country asks of you. Engaged citizenship basically says that you are doing things in order to make the country a better place, not because the country is asking them, but because you believe these actions might motivate those changes that you look to see. So this could include things like protesting unjust or unfair laws as you perceive them. It could involve things like campaigning on behalf of a candidate that you particularly align with. And so we see these two definitions sort of in conflict with each other. And I'll show in a few minutes some examples of how these get invoked in congressional speeches. But it sort of raises the question is, how does Congress conceptualize citizenship? Are they using these duty-based models when they're defining it, or are they using this engaged citizenship model? And so this project tried to look for evidence of both of these, and it did in fact find evidence of both of these through congressional speeches over the past 4 years. So just as a couple other points about Congress's role in citizenship. So in general, Congress's role is to respond to changes that impact constituents. And in the course of the Trump presidency, citizenship laws have in fact impacted a number of constituents across all its populations. So we see a lot of responses, and this is sort of amplified by the fact that when I looked at how many congressional speeches use the word citizenship in there, there's about 937 from the past 4 years. So that's a lot. They're using this terminology a lot. We also know that congressional speeches act as clarifying events. So they can help interpret public policy. They can help tell people how they should understand things. They should help reflect on the importance of certain things and sort of downplay others. And so congressional speeches are really valuable because they help people understand the political world that's going to shape their everyday life. We also know that in those congressional speeches, there's a lot of framing that takes place. Obviously, these are clearly strategic approaches, and they're oftentimes really toiled over in terms of creating the right words and picking the right frames. So oftentimes these speeches don't just reflect how people feel about something, but also reflect sort of these more strategic measures that are taking place. And then again, just demonstrating that members of Congress also have a role in this. During the 2017 protests about the Trump Muslim ban that also banned citizenship and naturalization processes from people who were immigrating from places like Iran and Syria, we actually saw a lot of members of Congress participate in those protests. Several of them showed up at airport protests, which were really popular at the time. So we see that they're not just enacting these sort of responses through their speech, but they're doing things in other forms of action as well. So methodologically, this project uses a discourse analysis of 937 videos that were collected from January 20th, 2017 to May 1st, 2020. What I was specifically looking for were speeches from members of Congress that use the word citizenship within them. And so I'll show you some examples. I have some more video highlights to show throughout this. I should point out that although I was specifically looking at citizenship for this project, the word immigration also appears a lot, and I'll actually show some sort of interesting correlations that we have towards the end of the presentation with political party and the use of these two words. So I'll show 5 different discourses, and I'll show some highlights and quotes that sort of amplify what we were able to find out about how does Congress essentially define citizenship. What does it mean to be a good citizen during the Trump presidency, according to Congress? So we'll start here with our first discourse, which is basically reflecting that citizenship is a set of responsibilities. So here we really see that duty-based citizenship model come full light. So we've got our first quote here, which I don't have a video for, but here's the quote, which is, should we include them in the Union as American citizens, deserve to be, of course, full citizenship? Of course, full citizenship. Here they're reflecting on the role of people who live in Washington, D.C., who of course do not have congressional representation, and there has been a push over the past few years to get DC granted statehood. And so the set of responsibilities, the way they're discursively describing what it means to be a citizen in Washington, D.C. is to have the responsibility of voting for representatives in Congress. So it's not just that they're engaged in the process, but there's certain things that they need to do in order to uphold that responsibility. Let's see a second example from Representative Elijah Cummings.
In the history of this body, this sweeping legislation will clean up corruption in government, fight secret money in politics, and make it easier for American citizens across this great country to vote. I believe that we should be doing everything in our power to make it easier for eligible American citizens to exercise their constitutional right to vote, not making it harder. We should be making it more convenient, not less. We should be encouraging more people to cast their votes, not fewer. We should be promoting early voting, absentee voting, voting by mail, and other ways to help citizens cast their ballots, not rolling back these very important programs. Unfortunately, some people disagree, including most Republicans.
So what we see there is Elijah Cummings, again, repeatedly using the word citizen and citizenship, and he's really referring to this role of voting as the responsibility of citizens. What's interesting is he's also invoking what is Congress's responsibility in terms of citizenship, and he's arguing that to make it easier for people to vote, that is the responsibility of Congress to help people to become good citizens. So he's kind of doing a little meta reflection there on what Congress should be doing. So our second citizenship discourse focuses on these rights as enacted over a lifetime. And again, if you study congressional speeches, it's not a surprise to say that there's a lot of invoking of children and youth and babies, because we know those tend to be very emotionally driven topics that sort of focus people's attention on this. So I'll show a really great exchange here between the acting director of the USCIS and Representative William Lacey Clay.
Pathetic families.
Okay, listen to this. Pediatricians in Indiana reported that parents of at least 2 infants in a neonatal intensive care unit received letters from USCIS telling them to leave the country within 33 days. Imagine that. You have just had a child that is so sick, she is in NICU. At the moment, your child's health should be the only thing you have to worry about. The U.S. government orders you to pack up and leave the country. Mr. Cuccinelli, did you know about these cases before USCIS decided to end deferred action?
Yeah, my answer is the same as the earlier examples.
Which is?
We do not look at particular cases when making process.
So you don't care?
No, you asked me. Did
no,
I know?
I'm asking.
You bet I care.
Do you care that
you bet
somebody's in a?
You bet I do. And it would be great. We could take care of this.
About
we
to
have
die.
A law. If you cared enough to pass a law, we'd enforce it.
Let me ask you this: what would you recommend those parents do when they receive that letter?
Well, what we expected most of them to do was very little, candidly. We send a lot of those letters out, and not in circumstances like you're talking about.
You want them to leave the country, pack up their stuff, take their sick child, and go?
Either that, or make their case in the immigration process where it's appropriate to do so. All in
the middle of them being there trying, hoping and praying that they save their child's life.
Which is why deferred action continues to exist elsewhere in
How cruel. Really? Really? I don't believe this. I yield back.
Thank you. The gentleman's time.
So what we see from William Lacey Clay there is an argument that there should be citizenship rights that are enacted over a lifetime. Again, there's this focus on children, on youth, on this case, babies, as he's referencing them, in order to demonstrate that there needs to be changes in the policies that are around the naturalization process and the becoming of citizens. What's interesting here is that Mr. Citronelli, his perspective is very much in line with that duty-based model of citizenship. He's following the law, and he's even saying, if you change the law, I'll be able to change my behavior. William Lacey Clay is saying, you know what, you need to be more of an engaged citizen. You need to focus on reflecting on the circumstances and making adjustments where needed, that you're not just going to follow the letter of the law, you're going to take into account these certain circumstances that these families are through. So again, in addition to reflecting on sort of the nature of citizenship, we actually see the two of them discursively adopt very different perspectives on what it means to be a good citizen. Here we have a third example focusing on this idea of the role of culture, not just policies. So when we ask people, what does it mean to be a good citizen? It's not necessarily, you know, who you legally belong to. In this case, it's the practices that you've adopted. So Lou Carrera says, when you say the government promised citizenship, what does that mean? They promise citizenship, but one of the things that doesn't happen is they sit you down with you and actually make sure you know how to be an American. So here focusing that there needs to be some sort of practice-based learning that goes alongside with this naturalization process. And again, it's not just focused on this idea of it's a policy and so all of a sudden you're a citizen. It's really focused on these cultural practices that make up the American identity. Our fourth discourse comes from reflecting on this idea of that reactive role of Congress. And as I said before, even though they are supposed to have that absolute power over the naturalization process, oftentimes they have to frame their positions on citizenship as responding to changes from the executive branch. And so here we see a great example as Gerald Nadler proposes a bill that would change some of the loose language that was done in one of the previous executive orders.
Such time as I may consume.
The gentleman may proceed.
Mr. Speaker, I rise today to urge my colleagues on both sides of the aisle to support H.R. 4803, the Citizenship for Children of Military Members and Civil Servants Act. This bipartisan legislation provides a simple solution to ease the burdens imposed by our current citizenship laws on those who have chosen to serve our nation abroad and their children. Most children who are born outside the United States to U.S. citizen parents are deemed U.S. citizens at birth. But under our current citizenship laws, this process can be more complicated for children whose parents don't meet certain bureaucratic requirements related to residency, a concept that is generally defined according to where one physically resides. This often affects military families and certain other federal employees serving abroad. As a result, when establishing U.S. residency is not possible because of a parent's overseas service to the nation, these families who make great sacrifices for our country are at a disadvantage. Without access to a streamlined citizenship process, parents must either guide their children through a lengthy and expensive naturalization process or find some alternative way to establish U.S. residency, which may even require them to cut short their overseas service commitment to the armed services. In August, members on both sides of the aisle were taken aback by the administration's reversal of a 15-year-old policy that allowed families of military service members and federal government employees to meet the residency requirement for acquisition of citizenship purposes while serving abroad.
So what we see there again is that language of response. He's talking about policies that are not enough to help the children of military families to become and have the rights of citizens. And so he's really reflecting on the missing pieces of that citizenship in order to propose his own policy. Again, we're seeing an invocation of young children. We also see this happen a lot with seniors. So this is sort of the same discourse that appears there. And our final discourse reflects on the changing meaning of citizenship based on the needs of immigrants. So reflecting that the things that made a citizen in the, let's say, early 1900s are no longer the things that we need to focus on today. So reflecting on how these things have changed over time and what makes a citizen today being very different. So we have an example from Bob Menendez. Today's citizenship goes beyond a category or a status. The identity that new citizens took during the mass immigration periods of the 20th century, that's very different than today's citizenship. So meaning has changed over time. The meaning of citizenship has evolved over time, and there's an argument for the policies to evolve alongside of it. I'll conclude today by just reflecting on a couple of quick points, but I'm happy to talk about any of these other observations. The first is you may be thinking to yourself, wow, that was a lot of Democratic examples, Allison, and you would be correct. There's actually not a ton of examples coming from the Republican representatives in Congress that talk about citizenship. And while I'd like to say that that's probably strategic, that they're using additional language instead of citizenship to demonstrate policies or to convince the audience of things, I don't actually know that. And so while this isn't a quantitative study, we definitely see a much more frequent use of the word citizenship and immigration by the Democratic Party and the representatives in Congress. It's also important to point out there's sort of a paradox that exists within a lot of these speeches, in that sometimes to be a good citizen means to engage citizenship policies and challenge the duty-based models. So we saw this with a lot of members of Congress who participated in those airport protests in 2017. In order for them to feel like they were good citizens and to enact that good citizenship behavior, it actually meant that they had to challenge the duty-based models of following the law and doing exactly what the government tells you to do. So it's interesting that sort of we have this paradox sort of playing out at this exact moment where people consider the role of a good citizen sometimes to challenge the definition of citizenship and the policies that exist around it. Thank you very much for your time. I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Allison. Joining us now is our Panel B discussant, Matthew Bergbauer. Dr. Bergbauer is an associate professor of political science at Indiana State University. He served a year-long fellowship at the Illinois Governor's Office and is the author of A Profile of the American Electorate. He teaches and does research in American politics, campaigns, and voting behavior. He grew up in Newton, Illinois, on a farm surrounded by pigs, cattle, tractors, and what he calls funky smells. Welcome, Matthew Bergbauer.
Hi, everyone. Allison, can you hear me okay? Okay, great. Thumbs up. That's what I needed. Thank you for sharing your research with me and everyone at the C-SPAN conference. Thanks for inviting me to serve as a discussant. Hello, all my friends with the C-SPAN archives and the Scholarship Institution. The paper in front of us by Novak, Citizenship, Immigration Reform, timely topic. We also know that citizenship tests are a consideration among states and for their high school graduates, and even some universities and their university presidents entertain citizenship tests for requirements of graduation. So it is a timely topic and salient topic at multiple levels, state level, national level, and even at a maybe educational level. On the paper's front half, we deal with a lot about this duty and citizenship, culture and citizenship is brought up quite a bit by Allison. And I wanted to I wanted to get her thoughts, and I wanted to encourage the paper to also entertain the idea of what a citizen ought to look like, right? This an immigrant who wants to be a citizen, and we know that the parties have different viewpoints on what that citizen ought to look like. Trump has a famous statement about wanting more Norwegians to be American citizens, I think. And I immediately thought, why would they want to be American citizens? I kind of want to be a Norwegian. So it should be the other way around, maybe. So I remember Trump mentioning that sometime in the past 4 years. And it got me thinking about what the American public thought, that what's their idea of American citizen, someone who is trying to be a citizen. And I thought that could be an interesting contribution to the front half of your paper. So if you so choose. Semi-related, I mentioned Trump and his idea of what a citizen ought to look like. I also remember Joe Biden talking about English being a requirement for American citizenship. And this is in 2008 when he ran for president. Hopefully my memory is correct on this, and I bet if I look hard enough into C-SPAN archives, I can find that line. So that was a nice, interesting little side note about what Joe Biden used to think. I don't know what he thinks now, but that was 12 years ago. But I vividly remember that idea. And that speaks to the culture, right? I thought that was a valuable contribution in your paper, right? This idea of not only duty as part of citizenship, but it's also a culture. I think this idea of a language requirement, I wonder if it's going to come back. It was prominent as part of the debate on citizenship once upon a time, and I'm curious to know if it comes back. Having said all those things, your paper doesn't go in a comparative route and it doesn't go in a normative route. And I like that. I don't want to encourage that. So it could very easily open up this door towards what do other countries in Europe do, for example, and it can also open the door of a normative argument. You don't really seek to do that, and I don't necessarily encourage that as well. If you're looking for that fourth book, then go for it. But otherwise, you may want to stick to what you got. Also in the front half of the paper, we have citizenship defined, explained. We have immigration kind of tied in with that. And sometimes I could benefit from a clear differential on the two concepts going into the methods section, right? So you can use your best judgment on how to do that. But sometimes I just get a little bit, I don't know sometimes it feels like maybe the words are being used synonymously, but I know that's not really what's going on. So I thought I could benefit from that. The Muslim travel ban you mentioned in your presentation, it's used as an example in the paper at least 3 times. And in the presentation, you talk about the tie-in, right? It's the idea of we had the Muslim travel ban, and the implications are more than just travel. It affected visas, student visas, it affected work visas, and that affects a pathway to citizenship. And I like that, that logical sequence of events that leads to citizenship. I also, from my own research, do not expect Republicans to talk about that policy while it was going on. This is one of those areas where Republicans kind of stayed silent. We know that Republicans are pretty selective in their support for Trump. Sometimes they're really vocal, but then other times they don't agree with Trump and they just stay quiet rather than actually opposing him and his plans. And this is one of those areas where they stayed quiet. And I think it's because it violated their religious test philosophy, right? They're really against the religious tests. And that comes up with the Supreme Court nominee, and that may come up with the travel ban. So I don't know if that's worth anything to you, but I just wanted to bring it up. I have to switch to my notes. So my next note is on advantages and strengths of the discourse analysis technique. I don't remember that from your presentation, but it's in your methods section. And I read the appendix. I love those definitions in the appendix. That's really helpful. I just wanted to know if it provides, I'm sure there is some extra strength that technique provides, and you can mention that in your paper. When we get to the qualitative data analysis, I'm quickly introduced to this idea of a tie-in. So you do the word search for citizenship, you do the content analysis of how it's being framed, the citizenship concept is being framed by the member of Congress, and you brought in something like campaign contributions as really what the topic's about. or the second one was on, it was on DC statehood. That's what it was. And I loved it. So any chance you can do those tie-ins, I thought that was really great to see, like, well, this citizenship is used as a mechanism to help support this argument or this argument. And so so that was a great angle, I thought, for your qualitative approach. If there's any chance for some simple statistics and number counts, I would love to see them. The number of mentions, committee speeches versus floor speeches versus White House mentions versus Congress mentions, the Democrat versus Republican. You mentioned that in your conclusion, both in your presentation and the paper. But if there's a count, a share, a differential, a distribution, nothing fancy, but I think I would love to see it if it's possible. And my last comment on the matter of the number of Democrats that show up in your data results and very few Republicans show up in your data results. I was willing to entertain any speculative comments that you may have on the idea when Obama is president and he's entertaining a controversial topic like DACA, if Republicans are speaking out more on the idea of what their opinion of citizenship, their values of citizenship are, and how DACA violates that. I don't know if that's a greater share of Republicans talking about citizenship during that time period, but you may have some thoughts about that. And if you did, I think you can feel free to share them in the conclusion. Those are my comments. Thanks again for sharing the paper.